What if the world you call reality is only the version that's been made safe enough to survive in? And what if, beneath its polished surface, there are cracks that only a few can see, and seeing them changes you? Have you ever had a moment where something felt off, but no one else seemed to notice? A silent tension in a room, a contradiction hidden in plain sight, a truth so overwhelming it couldn't be spoken aloud, only swallowed and carried. Maybe you thought it was just you. Maybe others made you feel like you were overthinking, overfeeling, overreacting. But what if your so-called overthinking was actually perception turned up too high? What if your sensitivity was not weakness, but depth? There's a paradox buried in the heart of consciousness. The more clearly you see the world for what it is, its illusions, its cycles, its fragile constructs, the more detached from it you may become. And in a society that runs on shared delusion, clarity can look like madness. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said that nature loves to hide. He believed the universe has a hidden order, a logo, invisible to most, but evident to those who learn how to listen. But this kind of listening, this kind of seeing, it comes at a price. To perceive deeper than others is to carry what others cannot bear. It is to hold truths that do not fit neatly within conversation or comfort. People rarely recognize clarity when it doesn't resemble their version of reality. And so those who carry it, the thinkers, the questioners, the seers, are often labeled as unstable, not because they are wrong, but because they are disruptive. And disruption, even if it's honest, is threatening. It's not that society hates truth. It's that society fears the discomfort truth brings. And so, it reacts to wisdom the same way the body reacts to a virus, with defense, rejection, and isolation. If you've ever felt like your thoughts were too heavy for light conversation, if your questions are met with silence or irritation, if you've ever felt punished not for what you did, but for what you noticed, then perhaps this is not madness. Perhaps it's the beginning of a very different kind of awakening. In the MyC chapters ahead, we will explore 13 signs, not symptoms of illness, but echoes of a deeper knowing. Not evidence of disorder, but clues that you may be carrying a wisdom that the world isn't ready for. But before we name them, we must first understand the pattern. Why history repeats the same cycle. The seer, misunderstood. The thinker, condemned. The truth, mistaken for threat. Because this has happened before, and those who carried this clarity often paid a heavy price. Throughout history, there have always been individuals who saw what others refused to see. They weren't loud prophets or political revolutionaries, at least not at first. They were often quiet, introspective, haunted by a vision or an insight that didn't belong to their time. And the world, unready for what they carried, called them mad. Socrates never wrote a single book. He wandered the streets of Athens, asking dangerous questions, simple ones, but ones that tore at the foundation of comfort and convention. What is justice? What is truth? What is the good life? He unsettled the powerful, disturbed the content, and invited people to think for themselves. For this, he was sentenced to death. His crime? Corrupting the youth and questioning the gods. But what he really did was disrupt the illusion. And for that, he had to be silenced. Then there was Giordano Bruno, the 16th century philosopher who claimed that the universe was infinite, filled with countless worlds, and that divinity was not confined to any single religious dogma. He imagined realities too vast for the church to accept. He was burned alive, not because he was wrong, but because his ideas broke the boundaries of the known world. And boundaries must be preserved when power depends on them. Joan of Arc heard voices. She claimed they came from angels. She led armies, defied kings, changed the course of a war. And for this, she was labeled a heretic, imprisoned, and executed by fire. Later, she was declared a saint. But while alive, her vision was too wild to be believed, too threatening to be left free. Nietzsche spent the final years of his life in madness. But even before his mental collapse, the world couldn't quite place him. He diagnosed the spiritual sickness of a culture already collapsing under its contradictions. He warned of the dangers of mass conformity, of hollow morality, of the slow death of meaning. And though his words were prophetic, they were misinterpreted, distorted, even weaponized. These weren't madmen. They were visionaries trapped in a time that could not contain them. They were out of sync with the dominant rhythm, tuned to a frequency that only a few could hear. And history responded the way it always has, by resisting, by punishing, by forgetting. Carl Jung understood this well. He believed that true self-realization, the process he called individuation, is not a path to peace, but to alienation. It is the peeling away of false identities, the dismantling of social masks, the confrontation with one's shadow. And with it comes a kind of sacred loneliness. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. The more you awaken, the harder it becomes to speak, without distortion. And the more truth you carry, the more others react, not with curiosity, but with fear. Social psychology explains why. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort we feel when confronted with information that contradicts our beliefs. Confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out only what supports our worldview. These are not flaws in reason. They are survival mechanisms. They keep us stable. They keep the collective dream intact. But you, if you're beginning to see differently, you become a threat to that dream. Not because you attack it, but because your very existence questions its validity. So if you've felt like your thoughts exile you, if your insights isolate rather than connect you, you are not the first. You are walking a path once walked by heretics, mystics, philosophers, and prophets. A path that wounds, but also reveals. A path that strips away illusions, but never quite replaces them with comfort. The question now is, not whether you're on this path. The question is, what are the signs? How can you know if this madness you feel is actually wisdom the world has not yet learned how to hear? There are signs, not loud, not obvious. But if you pay attention, subtle fingerprints of a mind no longer bound by illusion. Not madness, but a different kind of clarity. One that feels like exile in a world still asleep. You question what everyone accepts. Not out of rebellion, but instinct. You feel the surface of things is too thin to be real, too scripted, too safe. While others find comfort in consensus, you hear something off in the chorus. As Dostoevsky wrote, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." You search for that something, while others are content surviving. You see patterns others call coincidence, not in a paranoid way, but with a strange intuitive coherence. A face on a billboard echoes a thought you had the night before. A line in a book answers a question you've never spoken aloud. To most, it's random. To you, it's aligned. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, a deeper, hidden order speaking through apparent chaos. You feel alien in crowds, not because you dislike people, but because something in you resists merging into the group. You watch interactions like theater. You observe rather than participate, as if the collective rhythm is out of step with your internal one. You feel most human when you're alone. You speak truth and provoke silence. You mention the unspoken, and suddenly the room grows cold. You say what others feel but won't admit, and their eyes dart away. They may nod. They may even thank you later. But in the moment, truth makes people uncomfortable. And you've learned that wisdom often arrives dressed as social discomfort. You're told you think too much, that you're too deep, too intense, that you read too far into things. But you can't help it. Your mind doesn't stop at the surface. It digs. You find meaning in shadows. You hear metaphor in mundane conversations. You see the story beneath the news. You feel things before you. Understand them. A tension in the air. A sadness behind someone's smile. You register moods like weather systems. And only later, when the facts arrive, do you realize you were right all along. Kierkegaard believed that truth is not just intellectual, it's felt. A lived contradiction between what is and what ought to be. You sense decay where others see progress. The gleam of technology, the rise of institutions, none of it fools you. You see the spiritual erosion behind the screen, the moral compromises beneath the headlines. You don't buy into utopias. You've seen enough to know that most systems eventually serve themselves. You oscillate between profound hope and crushing despair, because you see what's possible, how beautiful it could be. And you also see what's real. That tension lives inside you. It breaks you. It fuels you. You feel responsible for things others ignore. The suffering of strangers, the absurdity of war, the loss of meaning. These aren't abstract concepts to you. You carry them, not because you choose to, but because you can't pretend not to see. You seek solitude not to escape, but to remember. Only in silence does the static fade. Only when alone does your mind settle into something true. The noise of the world dulls your inner compass, and solitude resets it. You've stopped fitting into labels. Too spiritual for the materialists. Too logical for the mystics. Too skeptical for the conformists. Too open-minded for the cynics. You've become unclassifiable, therefore suspicious. You're exhausted not by activity but by inauthenticity. Conversations with masks, interactions laced with pretense. You crave depth like oxygen, and in a shallow world you often feel like you're suffocating. And finally, you carry a truth you cannot fully articulate. It lives in your bones, a knowing without language. It flickers in dreams. It hums in quiet moments. But when you try to explain it, words fracture it. These signs are not symptoms of disorder. They are not flaws. They are the cost of vision, the pain of awareness in a world that prefers blindness. So why then does society label such minds as broken? Why must insight be pathologized? Why must the truth feel so much like madness? We need to ask, is the problem the mind, or the world that cannot hold it? Wisdom is not rejected because it is false. It is rejected because it is disruptive, because it dares to illuminate what others work so hard to keep in the dark. In The Crowd, Gustave Le Bon described how individuals, once absorbed into a mass, shed their critical faculties. The crowd does not think, it reacts. It does not question, it obeys. And in this trance-like state, truth is not welcomed. It is feared. Because truth threatens cohesion, it breaks the spell. Edward Bernays, the father of modern propaganda, understood this intimately. In Propaganda, he wrote that the conscious manipulation of the masses is not only possible, it's necessary for the functioning of society. He didn't hide this. In fact, he was proud of it. Bernays believed that democracy required invisible architects, those who could steer public opinion without the public even knowing it. But what happens when someone sees the architecture? What happens when a voice calls out that the emperor has no clothes? They become a threat. Mass denial is not passive, it's defensive, and it uses three powerful tools to protect itself. First, groupthink. When people gather in consensus, they stop evaluating evidence. Dissent is perceived as betrayal. Even intelligent individuals will suppress their doubts to remain in harmony with the group. They'll silence their own minds to avoid exile. This creates a fortress of shared illusion. 1. That truth cannot penetrate without consequence. Second, projection. Carl Jung warned that what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, we project onto others. In mass denial, the bearer of uncomfortable truths becomes the scapegoat. The anger, confusion, and fear the group refuses to face within themselves is hurled outward. The truth-teller is labeled arrogant, unstable, dangerous. The group doesn't reject the truth because it's invalid. They reject it because it reveals their internal contradictions. Third, scapegoating. Plato's allegory of the cave tells of a prisoner who escapes the cave of illusions and sees the real world. When he returns to free the others, they don't celebrate. They threaten to kill him, because to admit he is right is to admit they've lived a lie. The messenger becomes the enemy, not because he lied, but because he didn't. Throughout history, we've seen this pattern repeat. The prophet is stoned, the philosopher is poisoned, the whistleblower is imprisoned. The one who dares to see, and worse, speak, is cast out. Why? Because illusions are warm, they're easy to share. And truth is cold. It isolates. This is the game. The system protects itself through denial, not by accident, but by design. It teaches people to ridicule what they don't understand. It rewards conformity and punishes depth. It trains minds to look away, so the wise become exiles. Not because their insight is flawed, but because their presence breaks the trance. And if this is how the world treats those who see clearly, how then does one survive it? How do you carry a wisdom that the world mistakes for madness, without being broken by it? The burden of deep insight is a solitary one. To see beneath the surface, to perceive the invisible currents shaping human behavior and history, is to stand apart from the crowd. It is to walk a lonely path where misunderstanding and alienation become constant companions. Carl Jung called this the plight of the wounded healer. The one who carries wisdom must confront their own wounds, shadows that lurk beneath consciousness. Insight is not a gift without cost. It is a burden that cuts deeply into the soul. To face the dark truths within ourselves, to wrestle with our fears and contradictions, is to engage in shadow work, a necessary journey to avoid being consumed by the very knowledge we carry. This shadow is the unseen weight, the internal exile that mirrors the external isolation. The thinker becomes the outsider, a figure both feared and pitied. Society rejects what it cannot comprehend, and the seer is left to navigate this rejection alone. Simone Weil described attention as a form of prayer, an act of radical presence and openness to reality's complexity. To pay such attention to life, to suffering, to truth, is to invite pain. It is an act of devotion that can feel like spiritual exile, a surrender to a deeper, often harsher reality. Gurdjieff, a mystic and philosopher, taught that waking up to this reality is painful. The first step to the awakening of consciousness is suffering, he said. Awareness fractures illusions, but also severs the comforting ties that bind us to ignorance. The price of clarity is a kind of existential loneliness. This solitude is not mere physical isolation. It is a profound separation from the easy narratives that soothe the masses. The seer inhabits a liminal space between worlds, between what is accepted and what is real. It is a place of both torment and potential transcendence. Yet, in this silence and suffering, there lies a hidden strength. The question is not how to avoid the pain of insight, but how to carry it without being broken. Is it possible to transform this madness wisdom into a source of resilience rather than despair? This is the delicate balance, the art of living with a consciousness that both blesses and wounds. It is the crucible where true wisdom is forged, a journey toward becoming not just a bearer of truth, but a bearer of hope. How then do we walk this path with courage? How do we survive and even thrive when the world fears the very light we bring. The label of madness has long been a shackle, a condemnation placed on those whose minds refuse to conform. But what if this so-called madness is not a curse, but a profound gift? What if the isolation and torment are the raw materials for an extraordinary transformation? Alchemy, the ancient art of turning lead into gold, offers a powerful metaphor. In its symbols and secret processes lies a timeless truth about the human psyche. The painful journey through darkness is necessary for the emergence of something radiant and new. The lead represents the heavy, base aspects of our experience, the confusion, the rejection, the suffering. Gold symbolizes the integration of these experiences into a coherent, luminous whole. Carl Jung's Red Book captures this alchemical voyage vividly. Jung did not shy away from the chaotic depths of his own unconscious. Instead, he embraced the darkness, dialoguing with the voices and visions that many would dismiss as madness. Through this confrontation, he found the seeds of wholeness. His journey reflects what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, a descent into the unknown, a confrontation with trials, and ultimately, a return transformed. This is the alchemy of the outcast. The one cast aside by society, burdened by wisdom too heavy for most to bear, becomes the bearer of light. The solitude once endured as punishment becomes a crucible for power. It is not a power wielded for dominance, but a quiet strength that flows from deep self-knowledge and acceptance. Rainer Maria Rilke, in his Letters to a Young Poet, speaks to this transformation with haunting clarity. He urges patience with the self, the courage to sit with uncertainty and solitude. It is within this stillness that the soul learns to sing its true song, a song that may sound strange or even unsettling to the world, but is authentic and vital. Nonetheless, this journey is not about achieving a grand external victory. It is about a sacred personal realization that the true gold lies within. The outcast, the mad seer, the alienated thinker. These are not figures of tragedy alone, but of profound possibility. What if more people embrace this path? What if society began to see these mad souls, not as threats or anomalies, but as guides through the shadowed corridors of existence? What world might emerge if the wisdom of the outcast became a foundation rather than a fear? In this alchemy, there is hope, a promise that from darkness and exile, a new form of light can be born. Throughout history, the brightest minds, the clearest visions, have often been met not with admiration, but with fear and hostility. Society, it seems, has a persistent tendency to mistake light for fire, confusing illumination with destruction, clarity with chaos. When a truth shines too brightly, when insight cuts too sharply, it threatens the comfortable shadows where most prefer to dwell. And so, instead of embracing this light, the world recoils, casting the bearer of wisdom as mad, dangerous, or broken. This rejection is no accident. It is a defense mechanism deeply embedded in the human psyche and social structures alike. The familiar is soothing, the unknown, threatening. When confronted with wisdom that disrupts the collective narrative, people react as if their very survival depends on extinguishing the flame. This is why the voices of those who see too clearly often echo unheard, their visions labeled as delusions. Yet what if this so-called madness is, in fact, the most profound sanity of all? What if, in a world that has blinded itself with distractions, denial, and manufactured consensus, your madness is the sane response? A sane response to a society that is asleep, a culture that is lost, a reality distorted by fear and control. To carry this flame is to bear a heavy burden. It means walking a path of isolation, misunderstanding, and conflict. But it also means holding a vital spark, a spark that has the power to illuminate dark corners, to awaken slumbering minds, and to challenge the complacency of the masses. The question, then, is not whether the world will understand you, but but whether you will silence your knowing to blend into the shadows, or whether you will embrace the fire within, becoming the light they fear, the flame that refuses to be extinguished. This is the paradox of wisdom disguised as madness. It is tragic, because it often leads to exile. It is mythic, because it echoes through the stories of prophets, seers, and rebels across time. But above all, it is empowering. For those who carry this flame are the keepers of truth in a world desperate for awakening. Will you let your light be snuffed out? Or will you become the fire that burns through illusion, a beacon for those who seek a deeper, unshakable clarity? The choice is yours, and in that choice lies the destiny of not just one soul, but the possibility of a world reborn.